So Funcom recently held a Reddit AMA for Dune Awakening, and where they answered a ton of questions. The most interesting ones to me were anytime they were talking about post-launch updates or post-launch support. A lot of the other questions they were answering were stuff we generally already had information for. So I want to go over pretty much all of the answers that pertain to something that would be coming post-launch. Now later in the video, I'll quickly be going through some of the more specified answers and some of the less important things about post-launch support, but someone did write up a summary on Reddit, and part of this was specifically about post-launch plans. So we're going to go through that first, because there is also a decent chunk of information we have on post-launch support that I've gone over in previous videos that I'll also be going over some in this video whenever they fit in to these questions and answers. The first thing is game support duration. How long will Funcom support the game? The developers plan to support Dune Awakening for years to come, introducing story updates, content, and locations as long as players keep playing. Basically, they want to continuously update this game pretty frequently as long as people actually keep playing the game and presumably keep buying DLCs. Then PvE and narrative content. How much PvE or narrative content will there be? The game includes a strong narrative focus in the main story, in the factions, in the advanced trainers, and all of the just different NPC contracts you can make. More PvE content will be added post-launch. There is also a bit of a more detailed answer on this that we'll also go over later in the video. They also asked about private servers. Will private servers be available at launch? And they did say that they are working on private servers. They might not be available at launch, but it's something they're working on. Now, what it sounds like with private servers is that you will be able to like rent or start your own private server of specifically Haga Basin, which again is the size of the Conan Exiles map. I don't think there will be the possibility to have like private servers of the deep desert or something. So I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work. If people are just going to be able to rent their own like Haga Basin that's not connected to any other worlds for just them and their friends, there may be the possibility of that. Maybe you could turn on full PvP there or something, but it seems like it is something they're working on, at least for a part of the game. Then seasonal updates. Will we see regular seasonal updates and events? And they said yes, they plan to release major updates every 3 months, coinciding with DLC releases. We'll also go over that more because we have further information on that. New faction plans. Will there be a third faction later? Yes, there will be a third faction introduced post-launch of the game. I've talked about this before because one of the developers did talk about this in an interview he did, where essentially the third faction is going to play the role of essentially the balance between the other two factions, especially when it comes to the Endgame Lancerat. So basically, the two factions would be fighting each other like normal, like they will be at launch, and then whatever this third faction is will be the one trying to balance the other two, and the third faction gets rewards based upon how balanced the other two actually are, which is actually a really good way to do it, to try and make sure there's balance between all the factions. And then the final question of this summary is gameplay adjustments post-launch. Will there be changes to PvP balancing, weapons, and combat mechanics? The team is actively monitoring feedback and will make adjustments post-launch. That's definitely something that's good because the combat is probably still one of the weakest parts of the game, or that's been the general opinion across the community, that a lot of the game looks really good, maybe a little bit buggy or janky in some areas, but the combat is what seems to be the weakest part of the game. So I'm hoping they keep updating that and have that as a bit of a focus, especially early on. Now, for a bit of this, we actually have a lot more information on, and one of the biggest ones being their seasonal updates. We didn't actually know how often the game would be getting updates, because if you haven't watched some of my previous videos that have gone over this, they want a majority of the actual content in the game. So like new items, new areas, all that type of stuff to be free. And then they will also be releasing paid for DLC that seems to primarily be cosmetic focused, like you get a bunch of cosmetics with it. And some of them also seem to have story-based quests. So it seems that at this point, what the developers have explained is that they want DLCs to primarily be cosmetic and then like lore-based quests or missions or things like that. It doesn't seem that any of the main content added to the game that could like affect PvP or would be adding new areas, doesn't seem like any of that they want to be paid, but we got the information that's going to be every 3 months coinciding with DLC releases, and we know general times are for first 4 DLCs. So first off, on the launch of the game on June 10th, we're getting the Wildlife of Arrakis, which is just some cosmetic statues to decorate your base with. But then in October to December of 2025, so somewhere in that time period, we'll be getting the Lost Harvest DLC, which is a side story and cosmetics. So that would also coincide with a big free update of content. Then in January to March of 2026, somewhere in that time period, we're getting the Raiders of the Broken Lands DLC, DLC. This is said to just be another cosmetic DLC. And then again, we would be getting another free content update that coincides with that. And then finally, we have the Water Wars coming April to June of 2026. And this doesn't actually have a descriptor if it's like story-based or cosmetic. The description is just water is life. The water shipper families are at war, fighting for control of the polar caps of Arrakis. So we would also be getting another free update of content coinciding with this DLC as well. And this one is probably gonna be quite big because we're going to the polar caps. So this would require a new playable area, a new zone, or a new map. We already knew we were going to the polar caps at some point. They actually wanted to do this as one of their first bigger updates because it would be such a big departure going to these polar caps instead of just being in the similar deserts that we're going to get at the start of the game. So based upon those dates, we know our general timeframes of when we're going to be getting new and big content updates. And again, majority of the content seems to be free. And then we have a bunch of other answers to some less important things we could see post-launch. And then some of these questions were also elaborated on a little bit more. I kind of want to go through all of these kind of quickly because there is a good chunk of them. So this person was asking just about the general endgame of Dune Awakening. And they answered that the game is designed as a persistent online experience where people can live and take part in the politics of the Imperium, but it is complicated. The game is a fair chunk of launch content, and the endgame systems, which are primarily the Lancerad and the Deep Desert, are designed around the idea of player activity cycles. If you commit to them, there's always something to be done. The Deep Desert always changes layout each week, and in our attempt to create this pillar of infinite exploration. So again, kind of reiterating that the Lancerad, which you can also take part in if you're only a PvE player, and the Deep Desert are really going to be the end game focused things, especially on launch. But there is also a finite level of content outside of those systems. There are a finite number of quests, dungeons, and crafting recipes. The story missions run through the game and at a certain point ends. More of these finite elements will be added as the game matures, as well as new features that will arrive with updates. My personal plan runs for years, and as people who played Conan Exiles can attest, we committed to adding a lot to the game over time. And they did actually add quite a lot of content to Conan Exiles over time, even though Conan Exiles isn't this much bigger MMO type of game. And I do think they probably have a much bigger budget on Dune Awakening, especially with them working directly with Legendary, and this just being a much larger IP. I'm very much willing to bet that not only the game will be more successful than Conan Exiles, but they probably have much bigger plans and it's much better laid out over time than it was with Conan Exiles. They're also not launching it to early access like with Conan Exiles. Now, a pretty interesting one is someone asked about the tank, because some developers, I think on the Discord, talked about the tank not being able to be craftable or not craftable at the current state in one of the betas or something. But someone asked about it and they said, we are indeed planning to enable the tank post-launch. So it sounds like the tank will not be a craftable vehicle, but at some point after the launch, we will be able to craft these tanks. We've actually seen them in a good amount of officially released footage. What you would expect from a tank, some of them have machine guns on them, some of them have flamethrowers, and it sounds like maybe they didn't balance them or they just weren't ready for launch, or maybe they just want to keep them for some post-launch update that maybe has other ways to counter these tanks before they actually added them in. But this is definitely something I'd be really excited for. Adding in just these super armored tanks to PvP in the Deep Desert would be a pretty massive change up to just the kind of general balancing and state of the game. And then someone asked if there will be free cosmetics added at any point, because again, a lot of the DLCs are focused around cosmetics as one of the main or pretty much the only way it seems like they are monetizing for Dune Awakening. And they answered that we will have both free and DLC cosmetics post-launch. So it seems like they will also be adding in more free cosmetics. I'm not sure if that's just something given to you. Most likely these free cosmetics would just be new cosmetics added that are earnable in game alongside all the ones you could pay for with the DLCs. And then one of the more important pieces of information we received had to do with Haga Basin and being able to switch to different Haga Basins on your overarching world. And they said not on launch day, but we will add this functionality after launch. During the beta this weekend, which is coming up, I think starting tomorrow, you will be able to use the visit feature to go to another Haga Basin server on your overarching world. The only restriction you have when you are on a different Haga Basin is you can't land claim, but you can do everything else. The next version of this feature will happen either at launch or soon after, and that's being able to visit from the server browser instead of having to get in game and then join like on your friend to be able to go to their version of Haga Basin. The final version will happen post-launch, and that will allow you to move to a new Haga Basin within your own world, and this will not be working on launch. Now, if you don't know know how the server structure of Dune Awakening works, it's kind of isn't going to make sense, but essentially you choose your overarching world when you start Dune Awakening. This is like choosing your server on another game. If I go choose my realm on World of Warcraft or something, you're on that specific realm. That's kind of how it is in Dune Awakening. So the worlds are going to be separated from each other, so you won't really be playing with a bunch of other people like in the deep desert or something with players from another world. So that's choosing your overarching server. Then there will be a bunch of sieges in your world. These are essentially the different versions or shards or instances of your Haga Basin, because Haga Basin is a PvE focused area with a lot less players in it. And all these different sieges you can choose between, you'll be able to see on the server listing when you go into your world. And Haga Basins are going to have like a 40 player cap. So once you start up, you're going to want to try to get you and your friends on the same siege. But if you're not on the same siege, so you're on a different Haga Basin, you can still join on your friend and play with them in their version of Haga Basin. You just can't land claim, but they still can give you like permissions to their base and everything, and you can help them out with everything there. So it's not going to be that big of a deal on launch really, but there may be some annoyances with that. And then as explained here, after launch, you will be able to just change your Haga Basin at some point post launch. So if you're say already playing on a Haga Basin, maybe you've been playing for a week, and then one of your friends joins and picks up the game, maybe your Haga Basin has been capped so they can't really play with you. Well, post launch, whenever this update is added in, you would be able to just change your Haga Basin and be able to much more easily go to different Haga Basins with your friend to be able to all be permanently on that same Haga Basin and all build your bases on that same map. Now, someone asked about being able to place plants at your base, either as a form of customization, which I think is primarily what they're talking about, but it would also be interesting if you could use like a bunch of water or other resources and make plants at your base that you could continuously harvest for more water. And the answer is we will not have plants at launch, but you can place out projections of plants. This seems to be much more of the cosmetic version of plants. It seems like how they answered this, that post-launch we would be able to have plants. So maybe sometime post-launch we'll be able to grow plants at our base and probably be able to keep harvesting them for water. And then someone asked a few different questions where we got a pretty massive answer that actually changes up some of the things I've been talking about in some of my previous videos. The first one was about that third faction. And again, they answered there will be a third faction post-launch. But the really big answer here is they asked about monetization, essentially a cosmetic shop. And they said no MTX, so no microtransactions, no battle pass, no in-game store, no subscription, no bullshit. It will just be the game purchase and the seasonal DLC. So this is pretty massive. I very much thought they would be a cosmetic shop where you would be able to just buy cosmetics one at a time like a lot of other games, but they're having none of that. The only thing you're buying is you're buying the base version of the game and the seasonal DLC that seems like it's going to be around every 3 months. That seasonal DLC again is seeming to primarily be focused on cosmetics, but will also have some story-based quests or missions to go on as well to kind of fill out the lore and stories of the game in the universe. So a pretty massive reveal right there. I was not expecting that at all. I was very much expecting them to also have a cosmetic in-game store. Then the third question, they asked a little bit about PvE content or things like raids, and they answered for endgame PvE activities, we won't have raids like you would see in other MMOs. So it's not going to be massive raids that you would expect in something like World of Warcraft, but we will continue to add more late game content for players of all types post-launch. And this is definitely one of the big things I think they should be focusing on. They should be focusing on endgame PvE and PvP content, whether that be new specific content or just new endgame systems, and then also focusing on polishing up any of the jank in the game, and especially polishing and improving a lot of the combat. But that's most of the questions I wanted to go over. I think we got a good bit of actual new information, and some information we've gotten previously we have gotten clarified in this as well. So it seems like they have a pretty large and long scale plan for Dune Awakening, as long as people are actually playing it. And we do already know some of the places they want to take Dune Awakening. We know now with the DLC that they want to go to the polar ice caps. We knew that before that as well, but that's just something some of the developers were talking about. And then we do also know that after they kind of do a lot of additional content and we explore all of Arrakis, that they want to take us to other planets in the Dune universe, which is absolutely massive because all of these other planets in the Dune universe are so different from Arrakis. Like you have Caladan, that's just a very lush planet with massive oceans and water everywhere. So they'd have to completely change up the survival elements going there. And then there are also a lot of other survival elements they would have to add to go to other planets in the Dune universe. So that's something I am also very excited for. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.